The government backtracked on its earlier announcement and once again places the entire Philippines under community quarantine measures. This comes after some LGUs appealed the decision of the national government to lift the lockdown in those deemed as low-risk areas. Because of this, the Interagency Task Force Against COVID-19 introduces another community quarantine category called Modified GCQ. Let's discuss this development with our Malacanang correspondent, Maricel Halili. Maricel, let's go straight to the details. What is this Modified GCQ and what is its difference compared to the other categories?
Okay, Jess, we already asked Secretary Roque what does it mean by modified general community quarantine. But they cannot give us the clear guidelines yet on the modified GCQ because if we recall, yesterday IATF has released resolution number 35 which lifts the quarantine in some areas, particularly in regions 1, 4B, Region 5 except Albay, 6, 8, 10, 12, and BARM. But like what you said earlier, after some local executives appealed to the IATF that they cannot handle areas without quarantine, the IATF once again decided to impose modified GCQ to these particular areas. But they still have to finalize the guidelines of in areas under modified GCQ.
Well, at least, Maricel, for the new categories or at least for the new classifications that were released by the IATF, what's going to be allowed and what's not? I do understand that meetings will be allowed only, of course, however, it's going to be with a limited number of participants.
Okay, just what is clear are the guidelines under areas or in the areas under ECQ, modified ECQ, and general community quarantine. So, for example, in areas under ECQ and the modified ECQ and GCQ, all ordinary individuals are required to stay at home. But in GCQ, those only vulnerable and the transmitters of the virus, well, who's basically the youth, are not allowed to go out of their houses. For ECQ, all outdoor exercises are not allowed, but in modified ECQ, they are allowed to do some outdoor exercises, but these are limited to jogging, walking, and biking, and for as long as they will still implement a minimum health standard like wearing face masks and social distancing, that's allowed. In general community quarantine, some sports are already allowed. These are the limited contact sports, for example, tennis or golf. For ECQ, like what you said, gatherings are already allowed in modified ECQ, but we have to be clear about it. They will only allow meetings if, well, the maximum is only 5 individuals. And in GCQ areas, 10 individuals maximum. For travel, public transportation are not yet allowed in ECQ and modified ECQ. But in GCQ areas, buses, jeepneys, trains, tricycles, public transportation will be allowed, provided that only 50% of the passengers will be allowed to ride these public vehicles to ensure that social distancing will be imposed still. And government offices will also be opened in modified ECQ, but only 50% of their workforce will be allowed to go to their offices. The other half will still be working at home. In GCQ, they will impose an alternative work arrangement, for example, 4-day work week. So basically, those are some of the guidelines. But of course, whether it's ECQ or GCQ, there's still a need to impose the quarantine pass because they still have to filter the people who will be going outside of their houses.
Well, Mr. Something worth noting that you mentioned earlier, sports activities will be allowed, at least for the non-contact sports. Question now is, I would like to think that some of our viewers would be interested to know, will viewers, live audience be allowed in these sports activities?
No, it won't be allowed, Jester, because like we discussed earlier, mass gatherings are not yet allowed even in GCQ areas. Although there will be meetings or just a small gathering limited to 10 individuals only. More than 10 individuals are not allowed in GCQ areas.
Okay, what's clear now is that we have at least clearer guidelines when it comes to those areas which will be placed under modified ECQ and GCQ. Question now is, when can we expect at least a much clearer set of guidelines for the modified GCQ naman? Since this is relatively really what's new for us and the rest of our viewers.
Secretary Roque promised us earlier that he will discuss the guidelines on the areas under modified GCQ probably tomorrow. So probably we'll get a more clearer picture of what will happen in those areas by tomorrow.
All right, thank you for those updates, Maricel Halili.